Welcome, friends. Your boy old Bearby is back with another video. Today I thought we'd retro review the first appearance of Spider-Man in Amazing Fantasy number 15, published back in 1962. With penciling on the cover by Jack Kirby, and the writer-editor was Stan Lee.
I believe that Ditko also had a writer credit along with the artwork he created.
Yes, now that you mention it, you're right, Tommy Bear. This is the first appearance of Spider-Man before he had his own comic book series the following year. Apparently, he was so popular initially that they just had to give him his own comic book series. Go figure. But seriously, I can see why he was so popular even then. Some of the big superheroes before Spider-Man in the 60s were Superman, Wonder Woman, and Captain America. Valiant, respectable, and powerful heroes, to be sure, but not as strange and yet relatable as Spider-Man. I mean, before Spider-Man, probably there weren't that many strange yet easily relatable heroes, other than maybe Fantastic Four, who were another creation of Stan Lee's.
The Fantastic Four was co-created by Jack Kirby.
Okay, so the F4 were Lee and Kirby's creation. Thank you, Tommy Bear. Hey, speaking of strange, relatable heroes, didn't Lee and Kirby also create the X-Men?
That's right. That would be the following year, 1963.
Thanks, bro. Back to Amazing Fantasy number 15. We'll be using not the $1 million or more print issue. I wish I had that. But the digital version. The digital version I'm using for this review is in the Marvel Masterworks collection of The Amazing Spider-Man. But I'll only be reviewing content today, so this review might be relevant for either.
And the criteria for your review?
Ah, yes. We'll be reviewing it for plot, dialogue, artwork, and concept, while adjusting the score some for limitations and quirks of the time period. It was published a long time ago, you know, back in 1962. Things were a little different back then, Tommy Bear.
I know that, Bearby.
Just saying, we're gonna adjust for that in our score a little bit. As far as the plot goes, it's pretty familiar just from the flashbacks in movies and later comics, but it might be worth recapping here. I found myself surprised by a few things. Peter Parker, who, by the way, is called Peter Palmer for some reason in the last half of Amazing Spider-Man number 1.
That's a different issue, Bearby.
Oh, my bad. Well, he was called Peter Palmer for a little while, but now he's Peter Parker at the beginning in Amazing Fantasy number 15. Peter Parker is a science buff and something of an outcast at his high school. He's often ridiculed by his classmates and uses science as an escape. While at a science hall exhibit, we see old Spidey-to-be receive the fateful bite by the radioactive spider, and ouch! Spider Egghead is born! I mean Spider-Boy. Spider-Man. Definitely Spider-Man. Don't hurt me, Spider-Man. Remember, great power, great responsibility and everything.
Spider-Man would be a terrifying adversary.
Anywho, after testing his powers, not yet aware of his responsibilities, Spider-Man steps into the ring with a brute, who he easily dispatches for money. A kind of talent scout or manager type figure sees him, and sees an opportunity to make a fortune. Oh, he's a TV producer. My bad. So here's a part I think it's a little different, or at least different than what I'd expected. Spider-Man becomes this big TV star, different to what happened, say, in the 2002 Tobey Maguire film, where the focus is more on underground fighting. In Amazing Fantasy number 15, Spidey becomes this big star with television skills, performed without the help of trick photography. And Spider-Man becomes a bit of a diva. He dismisses his media and opportunists with, "See my agent, boys, I'm busy." He lets a thief that runs in a silly way run away sillily. Sillily? Is that a word, Tommy Bear?
I don't think so.
He lets a thief run by like a silly goose. He says to the police officer, "Sorry, pal, that's your job. I'm through being pushed around." And, "Save your breath, buddy. I've got things to do." So Spidey continues to be a star in TV, and not long after he learns about the murder of his Uncle Ben and goes to apprehend the murderer himself. He discovers, of course, that his uncle's murderer is the very thief he'd let escape while being a TV star. By the way, if someone's face is shadowy or obscured, that's a sure sign there's going to be some kind of revelation. Like there's someone you let run by you earlier. Take note, Tommy Bear.
I'm not. No.
Okay, so the plot is pretty straightforward, and I think it has all the beats it needs. There's a reason this story resonates, and the whole "with great power there must also come great responsibility" is so often quoted as to rival Shakespeare's famous lines in popularity.
I'm not too sure about that, Bearby.
I think some of the smaller parts of the plot, though, go by a little too fast. Like, how did he create his signature webbing so quickly? I know he's a science whiz, and there's not a whole lot of room in a comic book to show the trial and error of inventing things, but it seems like the invention that he creates almost materializes out of thin air. Okay, world, better hang on to your hat. Here comes the Spider-Man. Speaking of dialogue, that's where Amazing Fantasy number 15 is not at its strongest to me. And I know some of it is a product of its time, but I'll call it gee-whiz dialogue. This gee-whiz dialogue, or gee-whiz lingo, it kind of, I don't like it too much, Tommy Bear. I mean, I like a little bit of it, but it can get a bit overwhelming. Even if I imagine myself living in that time period, in the 60s, and even if gee whiz itself wasn't used until the 60s, it still somehow feels like it might be something from the 50s rather than 60s. From crackers and milk, bless him, to Peter Parker, he's a Midtown High's only professional wallflower. The dialogue can often bring a chuckle, and occasionally bring one chuckling on out of the story. And there's also this problem with characters explaining things for the reader's benefit. Even if such dialogue doesn't always make much sense story-wise. Like, these are things that the character would never say aloud if there wasn't a reader or audience present.
Isn't that true of a lot of comics, especially during that time period and earlier?
Yeah, you're right, but it might be something worth mentioning. I mean, look at what Spidey's saying on the cover. Yeah, that kind of thing happens a lot on covers of older comics, I think. But here it's almost like he's breaking the fourth wall. He says, "Though the world may mock Peter Parker, the timid teenager, it will soon marvel at the awesome might of Spider-Man." He's saying all that while carrying a criminal. He's giving his secret identity away to the criminal.
It's not meant to be.
And there are plenty of instances of dialogue for the reader's benefit, nearly breaking the fourth wall in the issue itself. Such as when the villain is interrupted while talking about his plan aloud, talking it seems mainly for the reader's benefit, near the end of the story.
You could possibly chalk a lot of that up to there not being much space in the comic book, Bearby. I mean, there were only 11 pages? A lot had to be communicated to the reader in a short space.
Yeah, but even if there's not a whole lot of space to show things happening, why couldn't they have used thought balloons instead? It at least would have made more sense than saying it aloud.
Maybe you got a point there.
One last thing about dialogue, about Peter Parker's dialogue specifically. He's taunted so much by his classmates, and there's a panel that makes it seem like a supervillain's beginnings when he says, "Someday I'll show them, sob. Someday they'll be sorry that they laughed at me." And while we sympathize with Parker and admonish the bullies, I think there's actually a question there that's carried into the Amazing Spider-Man series, something that maybe the narrator and even some of the characters consider aloud. What if Spider-Man used his power for evil? He has his fair share of problems, such as problems with money. I think there's even a part, this is an early issue of Amazing Spider-Man, where Spider-Man is so distraught over money to where he considers taking up a life of crime. Yes, thank you for pulling that up, Tommy Bear.
That was from Amazing Spider-Man #1. Are you saying that's a good thing or a bad thing?
I'm saying I don't know, but maybe it was a little much for me. Maybe it was...
A little over the top?
Yeah, a little over the top. I think it is interesting when heroes could have become villains, but the dialogue here might be a little over the top. Like it could have been more subtle.
Okay.
Let's talk about the artwork. The artwork was mostly good for me, but at times also seemed dated, like the dialogue. Of course, there's a lot of charm in that, as there was with the dialogue. Ditko was obviously a master of his craft, but I like some of his later Spider-Man work better. Well, here I get the feeling some of it was rushed. I mean, Spider-Man was an unproven entity at this point. And artists were operating under even more limitations then. Ditko was clearly a master of his craft, though, and I did mostly enjoy the artwork in this issue.
And the concept?
Well, the concept, it's amazing! It is, as the intro paragraph on page 1 says, a bit different, even now. I'm afraid of spiders personally. I'm not a person, so I'll say barely very afraid, so I would have expected spiders to go better with villains. It's like taking a couple of unexpected things like ninjas and turtles and combining them for success. Sometimes I guess it just works, and Stan Lee's decision to ground his heroes in real-world problems, as we can see, has helped make the Spider-Man concept very appealing to readers.
Yeah, Spider-Man's cool.
So here's my final assessment.
Let's hear it.
Okay, and I'm adjusting for the time period and so on. The plot gets a 7 out of 8. The dialogue gets a 5 out of 8. The artwork gets a 6 out of 8. And the concept gets an 8 out of 8. And there's my retro review of Amazing Fantasy number 15.
Wait! Why out of 8?
Because spiders have 8 legs, and 8 represents infinity, and infinity has to do with time, and this has been a look back in time.
You lost me after spiders have 8 legs.